Before you dive into your literature review, let's consider why lit reviews exist and how they're structured. A literature review really has two purposes. The first purpose is discovery. What does your reader need to know about this topic in order to understand your project? What do the experts already know about these topics? Now, it's important to keep in mind that this is not a summary of absolutely everything that anyone in the field knows about this topic. Instead, it's a synthesis. You're pulling out the most relevant pieces of information and you're packaging it in a way that's going to be easy for your reader to understand just what they need to know about your topic. The other purpose of your literature review is advocacy. You're advocating for your project and you're demonstrating to the reader why your project is necessary. So one way to think about your literature review is it's shaped like a funnel. You're taking your reader and you are walking them from a very general understanding. What is this thing that we're talking about to a very specific understanding? Why is your study needed to fill this very specific gap in the knowledge that we have about this topic? So here's an illustration of what that funnel might look like. At the top where it's biggest, you start out with background information. What is already known about this topic? You start from very general information and you proceed to get more and more and more specific as your reader understands more and more about your topic. Then towards the bottom of the funnel, you get into the critique. What are the gaps in the literature? Okay, we've studied a bunch of the literature on this topic, but where are there holes where we don't understand everything about the topic? And then finally, the gold star part of this funnel, you're justifying your project. Why is your study needed to fill the gap in the literature that we just identified? So for each concept, going from very general to very specific, you talk about how much of it is happening, who's involved, what is this thing? Let's define what this concept is. How does it happen? What are the types of it? What do we need to know about it and why? So you would do that for each of the concepts that you're covering in your project. And then towards the bottom of the funnel, you start to get into the more difficult but more interesting work. You start to pull your various concepts together. So how do your different concepts interact with each other? What do we know about the way that they work together? What do we not know about the way that these concepts work together? Those gaps are what we are interested in. And then finally, how will your study fill this very specific gap that you've identified? This article is called The Relationship Between Emotional Experience with Dyslexia and Work Self-Efficacy Among Adults with Dyslexia. And like so many academic articles, it has a very long, dense title, but it tells us what we need to know. Looking at this title, let's think about what concepts does this paper examine? I think the really major concepts here are probably going to be dyslexia and self-efficacy. So what would you expect to see in the literature review for this paper? Just as a reminder, here's how the literature review might look. So for this paper, I think that you would start out at the top giving background information. You would introduce the idea of dyslexia up at the top. So introduce the concept, you explain who it affects and how. Then you start to narrow it down a little bit more and you start to talk about self-efficacy. So that's your second concept. So you introduce self-efficacy as it relates to dyslexia and you give some more background information. What is self-efficacy? What does it affect in your life? What are the different types of self-efficacy? Then you get more towards the bottom of the funnel and you start to combine the two concepts together. So how do these two concepts, dyslexia and self-efficacy, interact with each other? Then the narrower part of the funnel is the critique of the literature. The author is going to identify, well, here are some studies that came close to what I want to know. Here's what they found, but I still need to know fill in the blank. That's why my study is necessary. It will fill in this gap I identified in fill in the blank. And then finally, at the end, the authors will justify their project. They will explain why their research was necessary and maybe present a hypothesis. If you can't find a gap to study, look at some of the relevant articles on your topic and look at their discussion section, because very often those relevant articles will say, we discovered a lot of new information in our study, but there are still gaps in the knowledge in this section, that section, the other section. So check out the discussion sections of relevant articles. If you still can't find any kind of gap, you can pick a specific population. If the scientific community has studied the heck out of some specific combination of a disorder and a behavior, for example, you can pick a specific population, like I want to study this disorder and behavior in female Asian American adolescents, and that should get you a gap.